You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Solana, Doge, and more. Cryptocurrencies and digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity, provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments throughout the world's leading crypto derivatives markets. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. The Crypto Rundown is brought to you by Amberdata. If you're entering the digital asset class, you'll need access to granular on-chain and market data from multiple venues to power research, trading, risk management, and compliance. Amberdata delivers comprehensive data and insights into blockchain networks, crypto markets, and decentralized finance, empowering financial institutions to apply traditional finance methods to digital assets. Amberdata eliminates the infrastructure setup, integration challenges, and maintenance headaches to access digital asset data, reducing cost and time to market to enter the digital asset class. Learn more and download their digital asset data guide at www.amberdata.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of crypto derivatives. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody, that music means it's Monday. Time to roll out the Crypto Rundown once again. See what's popping off in the world of crypto derivatives and indeed beyond. Spoiler alert, there's a lot. So we have a lot to catch up to. We were traveling last week on the Monday show. So we have 2 weeks worth of Crypto Rundown goodness to get to. My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as from the network upon which so many of you are binging. Remember, for those of you who are ready to take the leap, it's not for everybody. Those of you who are ready, though, to take the plunge, theoptionsinsider.com/pro is there waiting for you. Take you down the rabbit hole of awesome pro Q&As, of course, options oddities every week. Great guests. Well, coming up, end of April, so we're coming up on time to give away the big pro trading crate for the month of April. You definitely want to get your name in the hat for that. theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go to learn more. As we learn who's joining us on the old program today, I'm pleased to welcome back our old pal, Mr. Greg Magadini. It's been a little while since we checked in with him. Mr. Greg from Amberdata, of course. Mr. Greg, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown, sir. How are things going in your neck of the woods?
Thanks, Mark. Things are going great. It's quite a market, both in traditional finance and in crypto world. So I think there's a lot to talk about and a good amount of activity and good trading opportunities coming up.
All right, let's get to it then. A little bit of the old Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we do just that. We break down the world's leading digital asset. Yep, we're talking about the big dog, which is Bitcoin, looking a wee bit bigger than it was a couple of weeks ago on our last show, 84,902. Coming into the start of the show today, not quite 10,000 handles to the north, but looking pretty darn close, 9,052 to the upside to be precise. It was a little bit shy of 94K. 93,954 right as we flipped on the mics for the show today. So a wild bit of action out there. Mr. Greg, let's start with that because that's been top of the mind, I know, for a lot of our listeners out there. They've been asking and commenting for the last couple of weeks on this pretty aggressive rally, this aggressive turnaround we've seen in Bitcoin. And, usually when it's all hitting the fan like it was over the last couple of weeks in the equity markets, we see Bitcoin tend to get dragged down with it. When it all hits the fan, correlation tends to go to 1. This is one of the rare moments where we saw aggressive down days in the broad equity indices and aggressive up days at the same time in Bitcoin, leading a lot of people to kind of scratch their heads out there. So let's start there. What are your thoughts on this a pretty aggressive resurgence we've seen in Bitcoin over the last few weeks, even as the broad equity indices have struggled to maintain some footing, sir?
Yeah, that's a great point. I was recently in London visiting my friends Deribit for their podcast, and we were just talking about the same point. What is the right tail versus left tail argument for Bitcoin? And so the left tail risk, or the downside risk, is Bitcoin trades as a risk asset, and the right tail argument, or the upside argument, is that Bitcoin starts trading as digital gold. And I think we're still in the realm of, gray area on which direction it's going to go. I think for the most part, a lot of the people who own traditional equities, or maybe even speculative equities, such as the Wall Street bets crowds, you could say, are a lot of the same investor base who invest in Bitcoin. So in that sense, Bitcoin trades as a risk asset. But if we look at within the crypto realm, we know for sure that altcoins and meme coins trade as risk assets. And for the past couple of years, actually, Bitcoin has slowly gained market dominance. And so despite a lot of the risk-off sentiment, Bitcoin continues to climb and gain market share. And to me, the way that I read that is that Bitcoin is slowly trading more like digital gold. And if we look at real gold, or sort of the gold that everyone knows, that's hitting all-time highs. Gold vol is trading between 23 and 28, which is quite high historically speaking. And so when the dollar has weakness, and when the idea of the US dollar reserve currency is maybe coming into question, well, gold has been a huge benefactor of that. And so is Bitcoin, or AKA digital gold, sort of the next successor to traditional gold? And if that's the case, then I think Bitcoin has a lot more upside. Now, on the flip side, if Bitcoin trades as a risk asset, I think there's a strong argument, and this is an argument that I made. Do we know how crypto performs if equities are in a true bear market? Because I've seen crypto have a 90% pullback multiple times while equities are ripping higher. So I think those are the two scenarios we got to think about. And I think Bitcoin and crypto as a whole, but Bitcoin specifically, has a lot of potential for fat tails on both sides. So that makes a lot of interesting trading opportunity.
You and I have obviously discussed Bitcoin's correlation many times in the past. I think in the past, you were one of our guests who kind of subscribed to it's more of a high-tech allocation because it seemed to move in lockstep with a lot of the big tech names out there. You think that's kind of fallen by the wayside now, Mr. Greg?
Yeah, I think there's clearer cryptos for that analogy. I think, Ethereum or Solana, those are more of the Web3 tech plays, whereas Bitcoin is more of the buy it and just hold it, kind of it just sits there, sort of like the gold commodity play. So I think right now the world is viewing Bitcoin as the gold commodity play. And we're seeing that in corporate finance. A lot of companies are now springing up, like GameStop, adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet. Obviously, MicroStrategy was the pioneer in that. Now we have another company that just got set up by Brandon Ludwig, who will be buying Bitcoin to their balance sheet as well. So I think the treasury allocation of Bitcoin is going to be a growing theme. And then I think the big right tail scenario is if governments such as, around the world start doing the same thing, that'll be quite interesting.
Interesting indeed. Speaking of interesting, listeners, let's see how all this activity is impacting the vol and the skew out there in the big dog, which is Bitcoin. Remember, if you want to check these numbers for yourselves, and we've said it before, you literally have no excuse now. The GUI is free. All sorts of data for free available over there. Amberdata.io, the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. If you did that, listeners, if you started looking at, let's start vol, which is where we normally like to hang out. Then we'll go into skew and wherever else the whims of Bitcoin take us. But right now, weekly vol, listeners, coming back down to earth. We were at a 53 last week, which is already fairly low for Bitcoin. If you've been around Bitcoin for a while, you know it can obviously get a lot frothier than that on the weekly vol front. And that's coming in another 10 points, 43. So already starting to get a little bit quiet on the weekly vol front. And we're not even really into the dog days of summer yet, which is when these assets tend to quiet down historically. But yeah, 43 out there. That's kind of low on the weekly vol front. Not that dissimilar on the monthly vol front as well. We're at a 52 on the show last week, 45.5 this week. So coming in markedly there as well. Not quite 7 points, but pretty darn close. And going out to the hodler territory, the 6-month and beyond vol front, 54.5 on the show last week, 51.5 this week. So Greg, if I'm going to read between the lines on these numbers, I guess we should just load up on all the vol right now in Bitcoin. What do you think, sir?
I mean, I don't actually hate that trade. I think the idea that future volatility for Bitcoin is only headed lower. I think there's a strong structural argument to be made about the asset maturing and people being able to sell volatility via IBIT for the first time. I think that is a strong argument. But that being said, when you have VIX, near 30, when you have gold vol near 25, when you have VXTLT call it the 20 handle, and then you have Bitcoin sort of at the historical lows in terms of implied vol, I think that dislocation, something has to give. So do I think that traditional finance, we've seen a top in vol for the next 4 years? I do not think so. And so why would I think that crypto has topped in vol?
This is kind of wild to me. If I was just looking at these numbers, Greg, if you just showed these to me without any context, I would look at this and say, oh, we must be in, middle of August, because it's pricing in a whole hell of a lot of nothing, and everyone's in the south of France or out in the Hamptons. They're not trading crypto right now because they're pricing in a whole heck of a lot of nothing. You'd never know that we were still in the midst of a trade war, Greg. It's not like the all clear has been sounded out there. But nonetheless, is what we're getting, listeners. Going out to the skew, a similar easing, if you will. We're not really pricing in much of anything, any concern, any bias, any interest in either direction, to the upside or the downside right now, listeners. Last time on the show 2 weeks ago, we were looking pretty bearish, almost a -4 on the weekly skew. All that's gone. We're pretty much flat again. Positive 0.75, if you want to be precise, which to me is pretty much flat. Anything a point plus or minus in either direction is pretty much flat to me, listeners. So not much going on the weekly skew front. If we go out a little bit farther to the 30-day skew, we were -1.5, so close to flat on the show last week. Positive 1.85, so swinging slightly to the upside out there, but again, not a huge evolution out there. Going out to where the hodlers hang out does seem like things are getting a little bit more optimistic. We've been talking for a while about, it seemed like that longer-term premium was starting to vanish, especially in names like ETH. We'll get to that in a little bit, where that long-term call premium that just exists almost by definition in most major crypto assets was starting to erode, getting a little bit of that juice back in Bitcoin right now. It was positive 1.5 on the show 2 weeks ago, positive 3.5 this week. So a few more hodlers starting to pick their heads out to the upside, but still pretty modest out there. Greg, it seems like we're just twiddling our thumbs right now, sir. What are your thoughts on this kind of shoulder shrug we're seeing both in the vol and the skew in Bitcoin right now, sir?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. Well, I think the longer dated skew being positive, there's kind of two strong arguments. One is the right tail scenario is being priced in, spot vol correlation being positive. All that makes sense. So that's sort of the argument justifying the slight premium to the calls, longer dated. I think there's also a strong argument that we're going to start seeing traditional investors or yield-bearing investment vehicles that own Bitcoin and sell cover calls against them start to become downward pressure on that long-dated positive skew. I think that's a structural trend. But obviously, if the realized spot vol correlation is going to remain positive, you're going to see that being justified. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a battle between realized and implied. Obviously, if you look at gold, you can see positive spot vol correlation like we're seeing right now, but it can also trade negative. And so Bitcoin's been prone to do both. We've seen huge negative spot vol correlation around COVID, around FTX, around big downward moves such as May 2021. And then we've seen positive spot vol correlation over the past 18 months. So I think there's going to be a battle there in terms of which direction it goes. But like you said, it's not priced in to extreme relationships in either direction. So to me, I think, I like the long-term right tail play from an options perspective, because that's the best way to capture both the upside right tail scenario while hedging the downside left tail scenario. And so in my mind, I'd rather own that call long term than be a seller of it.
Well, you are right. It does seem like the entire world is awakening to the joys of selling premium in Bitcoin and crypto-related assets there, Greg. So that probably will maybe impact the way this vol plays out in the future. We have seen how many guests come on talking about the marvels of the yield to be had in names like IBIT, but also just kind of enrolling your own in a variety of products out there, listeners. They've all seen what, MSTR and others are doing out there, and they want a piece of that action. Speaking of IBIT, listeners, let's get out to that action right now. Looking pretty frothy, gaining another $0.50 just since Greg and I started talking. Was at 53 1/4 right before we started the show. 53 3/4 right now, up 5.5 handles from our last show. So again, Bitcoin rallying, taking IBIT right along with it, listeners. That ADV back north of 400K, 415 right now, up another 43,000 contracts a day. So IBIT putting up the numbers. Today doesn't seem like it's going to hit it, but again, we still have about an hour left in the session, so anything could happen. Nearly 300,000 contracts on the tape right now. 291 to be precise. If you're wondering what is the big dog out there in IBIT today, it is 30,000 of the May double calls, the May 55 calls. So you like that, listeners? May double calls with IBIT at 53 3/4. Looks like they're trading for around $1.75. So it's like some overriding going on, just kind of getting back to what we were talking about earlier out there. But could be some buying activity smattered in there as well. The 30-day vol, if you're wondering right now, in IBIT, kind of following this trend of vol getting crushed across the board at about a 46 right now, down 8 points from where it was on our last show. Greg, May doubles lighting up the tape out there in IBIT right now. What's catching your eye out there in IBIT lands? This is the last time we chatted, sir.
Yeah, I think IBIT, one of the most interesting things is now we have options all the way out to December 2027. So that's almost 3 years of optionality. Up until recently, the most we had on listed markets was 1 year options on Deribit. So to be able to go out 3 years, I think is very interesting. Again, I think, where vol is sitting right now in this anything can happen environment, which we've seen. We've seen with bond vol, we've seen with gold vol, we've seen with equity vol. I'd rather be an owner of this vol than a seller of it. And so I think there's kind of some interesting plays that could be done. If you just want to buy it, set it and forget it. I think that's an interesting trade, especially where vol is today, and the fact that Skew is not, it's pretty much near even, so to speak. To me, that seems like an interesting type of play, and IBIT is the vehicle that's kind of unlocking this type of trade. So I think that's great.
So May doubles for $1.75. Greg says, give me some of those. I'm going to add those to my portfolio out there. Maybe not quite that near dated, Greg, but
yeah, it's a little near dated for sure. I want to let things play out a little bit.
You like to go a little bit longer term. I know you, sir. Let's keep rolling out here to the land of BITO, listeners. What's BITO up to? 20.5 as we kicked off the show. Puts it up exactly $2 from our last show. It is going ex-div right now. If you're wondering what is the latest BITO dividend you'd be collecting if you owned it, about 36 cents per share. So factor that into your return calculations if you're riding the BITO train, listeners. The ADV 34,000, so it seems like it's bottomed out around that mid 30,000 range. We've kind of been wondering for a while, how low will BITO go on the volume front now that IBIT is lighting the world on fire? Seems like, at least for now, the answer is somewhere in the mid 30s. Today, 18,000 contracts on the tape. So again, doesn't seem like it's going to hit it today, but it seems like if you just looked at these numbers for today outside of any context, you'd think we were hanging out in the dog days of summer, nobody coming to play. The vol looking a little bit spicier out there in BITO, though, 61, which is kind of interesting that BITO would be catching a bid from the vol side when the rest aren't. I'm going to probably chalk that up to a little bit of lack of liquidity out there now that we're getting down to 34,000. It's certainly harder to read the tea leaves there versus, let's say, close to 500,000 in IBIT. A lot more going on out there. Greg, anything catching your eye in BITO or your beloved BitX these days, sir?
You know, I haven't traded BITO in quite a while, and so I haven't really been looking at it. And then in BitX, I mean, I think there's definitely interesting trades to be done there. But that being said, the IBIT liquidity is just unbeatable, and so, you know, I'm starting to just say play in the IBIT sandbox, because you can get in and you can get out, and you can put on flies, you can put on spreads, and everything kind of executes.
Kind of hard to argue with over 400,000 contracts a day. You can get in and get out and get on with your day, which is a good thing. We've seen once you start getting lower on the liquidity spectrum, things get challenging. Obviously, a BITO is one. We talk about a lot of these vol products on vol views as well, you know, SFIX and others that have kind of languished on the liquidity side of late. So at the end of the day, it's hard to argue where the action is. It's easier to get in and get out, listeners. And speaking of action, I know Greg's been waiting all show just for this product, listeners. He's all in on all things MSTU. And, you know I've talked a lot of smack about this product. I've said it's solely the realm of crypto degenerates. And I still mostly believe that. But that said, it seems like there are many more degenerates out there than I was willing to give credit for before, because that ADV is up to 75,000 contracts a day, which, again, if you had told me not that long ago that there'd be 75,000 contracts a day going up in this levered MSTR product, I would have said you're a crazy person. But that is where we're hanging out right now. By the way, the big open position in MSTU right now, 61,000 of the June 25 calls. So 25, that seems like far, far in the distant rearview mirror at that level. But interesting. Seems like a lot of them were added back in January when MSTU was $3, actually $12.65. So that makes a little bit more sense. It was a little bit more lofty, but still $25. They've got a ways to go, listeners, if they are buying those. And if they're selling them, then they have to just hold on for a little while longer. Greg, I know you're all in on MSTU, sir. What's been catching your eye out there in this product solely for crypto degenerates?
Yeah, well, so MSTU is 2 times the MSTR. I think MSTR is pretty interesting as the lever play on Bitcoin. There's some interesting call spreads that you can kind of do there. Way out of the money. If you can pay like 7 cents on a dollar to get some sort of upside exposure. Obviously, if that thing moves, MSTU is going to go nuts. But let's not forget that high vol assets that have a 2x payout have that decay over time. So if you're thinking about sort of those long dated options, you kind of got to factor that in. So you'd have to model in sort of what's the average vol, and then based off that, you can calculate or you can project the drag out to say a year or 2 years, and then you can get an estimate of what's the forward price 2 years out, and then you see what the options are on that. So that's kind of a way to think about it. So if you're looking at vol using spot prices, it's going to be a little bit underestimated, the vol, because the spot price is going to be lower than the future projected spot price or the forward price. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, I think there's some plays to be made in MSTR, and therefore there's going to be plays to be made in MSTU. I would say MSTU is the shallow end or the short dated pool that you want to play in. And if you want to play in the long dated pool, go to MSTR.
Yeah, kind of hard. Not for the faint of heart, the long-dated contracts in MSTR, which is why I was so surprised we saw number one position out there. Those June 25s, that seems a long-term contract, especially when you're trading them in January. 6 months? That's an eternity in MSTU, sir. But hey, who am I to question the degenerates? Instead, let's just keep on rolling right on into the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, time to explore the altcoin universe, see what's lighting things up outside of the big dog, which is Bitcoin. Let's kick things off, as we are wont to do, looking at the top 10 from a market cap perspective. And it's always fun to check in, see how much it's evolved since our last show. This case, it was 2 weeks ago. A number 10 got you to Cardano back then. It was $22.6 billion worth of market cap to break into the top 10. And spoiler alert, that number is higher this week. That rising tide lifting all boats. Number 10 gets you to Tron this week at $23.4 billion. So obviously rising up a little bit. Cardano also ticking up a little bit, up to number 9 now at $24.63 billion. Number 8, it's Doge, $26.2 billion. Number 7, USD coin, $62 billion, pretty much exactly. Number 6, it's Solana. I saw some folks in our pro chat before the show talking about Solana. We'll get there, don't worry. Solana, $75.9 billion worth of market cap. Number 5, it's BNB, $84.75 billion. Number 3, it's XRP, slowly climbing its way back up, $132.75. Number 3, it's Tether, $147.3. Number 2, it's ETH, because of course it is, $213.5, at least for right now. Who knows? That could change if ETH keeps on the trajectory it's been on for the better part of this past year. And then number 1, of course, it's Bitcoin, 1.86. So closing in on the 2T, not quite there yet, but closing in on the 2T market cap level. Let's get out to, at least for right now, still number 2 in the market cap space. Again, listen to some of our other programming listeners like the Futures Rundown and others if you want to see just how much of an atrocity ETH has been on the long side for the better part of the past year, certainly for the last few months out there. It's been a rough go year to date for ETH, coming on the heels of a not great year out there either. But ETH, you know, that rising tide does lift all boats, and ETH taking a bit of a turnaround, not quite even to the 2K level, but we'll take what we can get if you're an ETH bull, listeners. It was 1645 on our last show, 1768. So slowly, ever so slowly, crawling its way out of the hole that it has dug for itself, listeners. That's up 123 handles from this time last week. Greg, you and I have been kicking ETH for a while. It's been down most of this year, and we keep kicking it while it's down. I don't see a lot of reason maybe to change that narrative, but maybe you do. Maybe since the last time I talked to you, a month and a half ago, you've turned into just a raging ETH bull. What do you got for the ETH bulls out there, Mr. Greg, who have kind of been languishing so far this year?
Yeah, I don't think I have a good argument beyond just sort of beta exposure for the ETH bull case. Not right now, but I do think there's a lot of interesting trades. So obviously, ETH has a higher vol than Bitcoin. And if you look at essentially short-dated 14 days and below, that vol has been underperforming implied. But if I go to 90 days out or 60 days out, the realized has surpassed implied. So vol buyers have been rewarded for their expression, especially because of the downside moves. So one of the things that could be interesting is if you wanted to do sort of a straddle play, long dated, you could own the Bitcoin upside and own the ETH downside. So for example, right now there's only a 13% probability of ETH being below 1,000 by the end of the year. You know, if we get a real equity bear market, I think the probability of ETH being below 1,000 is a lot higher than 13%. So that's kind of an interesting type of trade. Another thing that's very interesting is if I look at the ETH futures curve, right now the contango into futures market is about 5% annualized premium if I go, say, 90 days out. So that means I could buy ETH, sell the future, and collect 5%, which is around risk-free rates. But what we're going to get pretty soon, or what's being talked about is spot ETH ETFs with staking rewards. So ETH has a natural yield to it. So theoretically, the risk-free rate should incorporate that natural yield. And so I think that Contango could potentially come down even more. So there's probably some interesting trades to be done there. And then if you're trading future options such as derivative options, well, those are priced on the future. So they're incorporating that forward. So when you're buying, say, $1,000 put, and then the Contango gets crushed because there would be a trade there where you buy the staking ETF that gives you a dividend, and then you sell the future against it and just capture that yield on both sides of the market. That's going to bleed through and make that put more valuable as the forward price comes down. So again, that's another type of trade that's very interesting. So I think ETH is an interesting trading vehicle right now. Obviously, that Bitcoin ETH trend remains undisturbed. It continues to head lower. At some point, there might be a good catalyst for bottom fishing on that thing. But I think for now, the trend is your friend, and then there's just going to be interesting structures to be done there, at least spreading ETH versus Bitcoin, or I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit later, maybe Solana versus ETH, those types of trades.
You're spooking people, Greg. ETH below 1,000, but I like what you're putting down there about the ETFs. It is interesting because you're right. That's one of the few attractive prospects you could argue for ETH right now, the staking. If you can capture that via the ETF, that certainly does raise some interesting prospects for ETH. Let's see how those prospects are playing out right now, listeners, on the vol and Skew front. Kind of like we were talking about with Bitcoin, vol kind of coming in across the board. Weekly vol was at an 80 on our last show, so kind of frothy. Back down to a little bit shy of 67 right now, about 66.8. Still pretty juicy when you compare it to Bitcoin, obviously, but that's the way ETH has traded historically compared to Bitcoin. Is that still going to hold up in the future? I guess that's an open question, but right now we're still looking a little bit frothy. On the 30-day vol front, 73 on the show last week, 66 right now, so coming in again about 7 points there. Going out longer term, a 70 on the 180-day vol front, 67.5 right now. Kind of getting to Greg's point earlier about how realize's been outperforming implied of late. That certainly is an interesting setup, especially when you hear some of those vol numbers out there. Skew front, we're not seeing a heck of a lot of evolution on the weekly side. We were kind of maybe a little bit more bearish last week, still kind of flat right now on the weekly vol front. Going out to the 30-day Skew front, -4 almost on the show last week, -3.85. That is now gone. We are pretty much exactly flat. That means no bias to the 25 Delta call, listeners, no bias to the 25 Delta put. They're all trading pretty much in line with that at the money option, which is kind of interesting. Again, showing you, at least for right now, the options are not pricing in a heck of a lot of anything in either direction, which is kind of interesting. Going out to the full 6-month Skew, we are seeing a little bit of that premium start to return. We were talking about just on the last show, I think, we've been kind of hitting this drum for a while in ETH, but that premium that normally exists in these major crypto assets on the longer term upside front was threatening to vanish in ETH. That kind of showed you how dire things were getting. And now clearly we're not out of the woods just yet. 100 handles is not going to change anything really at the end of the day, but we are starting to see a little bit of a premium start to claw its way back in. And it's ever so modest. It was 1 point on the show last week, positive 3.75. Greg, what are your thoughts on the prospect for that long-term upside premium that has been a staple in most major crypto assets? It seemed like it was threatening to go the way of the dodo recently, starting to claw its way back. And do you think that's an interesting indicator as well, that maybe if that does happen in the near future, maybe the bulls have finally soured on ETH, sir?
Yeah, I think, the realized spot vol relationship should theoretically be the biggest driver of the Skew. And so in my mind, the spot vol correlation continuing to be negative for the longer term makes the most sense. I think for Bitcoin, it's a different story than for ETH. And so again, just like buying the put might be undervalued because of the forward, well, it also might be undervalued because of that Skew, where you can do interesting relative vol trades between Bitcoin calls and ETH calls. You can do interesting relative vol trades between the Skew trades between Bitcoin and ETH. So in my mind, there's something really attractive here. And again, it's a great way to hedge the beta exposure outside of the market and still retain some of that exposure to the upside via Bitcoin. So, getting long the downside or getting short ETH and getting long the upside in Bitcoin is kind of an interesting combination. And you can do that through the vol surface as opposed to just the outright spot markets. And there's a great setup here.
All right, you were asking for it earlier. We'll get there now. Solana climbing back up as well. 130 almost exactly on our last show. 146.69. So up over 16 handles since our last show, listeners. But Greg, this is something you and I have talked about quite a bit as well. This resurgence in Solana. Obviously, we're not as lofty as we were 250, 260 not too long ago, but definitely a lot more interest in Solana. We were talking not that long ago, it seems like, on the show. We had incorporated the Solana options data. We were talking about all the vol and the skew out there. Then we all know what happened. FTX kind of screwed the pooch, and it took Solana down with it. Starting to come back to life out there. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing out there in Solana? And do you think we're starting to get back to that inflection point in the Solana options where they're worthy of paying attention to again, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Solana derivatives market is very interesting right now. So unlike Bitcoin, unlike ETH, if I look at the forwards on Solana, they're actually trading flat to negative. So meaning the future is actually in backwardation. We recently had the CME futures launch, and then we recently had Solana ETFs built on top of those futures. So if you have a backwardation term structure, owning those ETFs is actually like something that accrues value as opposed to decays. So that's kind of an interesting narrative. And then if I look at sort of the Solana flow, I wrote about this on Sunday. The biggest trade last week was someone selling 100,000 $200 calls for May 30th expiration. So I assume this is a covered call seller. I don't think someone is selling outright $100,000 Solana calls at $3 a piece. But what that means is that you kind of have this yield generating entity who is more or less vol price insensitive. To me, that's an interesting play to take the other side of that trade. A lot of the flow right now is call selling in Solana. I mean, almost all the flow is call selling. And from a speculative standpoint, I think we can't underestimate the potential for anything can happen in this environment. And we've seen a lot of sort of developments, the Trump coin, Pump.fun, all the meme coins being Solana based, a lot of sort of enthusiasm around Solana. And so upside potential in Solana that can surprise is very much on the cards or in the cards on the table. And then if we look at just outright vol for Solana, Solana can get over 100 implied very easily, and it rarely gets below 80. And right now we're kind of hanging out at that lower range. So again, I think that's another opportunity. Obviously, who knows if that works out, but just kind of from a statistical standpoint, it's not a bad trade to be long that Solana upside here.
Yeah, we haven't talked to you in so long. They've actually launched a Solana future since the last time we chatted. Let's start there. What are your thoughts on that future, obviously? And then also I'm looking right now, that is bringing on the universe of ETFs. We now have the straight up one-to-one Solana ETF, but of course the levered is out there as well, which I know you prefer, like SOLT and others. And then of course, the prospects for the spot ETFs are on the horizon, but we'll start with the future. Have you watched it? Have you started playing around in any of these Solana ETFs that are trading off the future, sir?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the options to be listed on them, but I think overall this is very constructive for the Solana ecosystem. This is what we've seen with Bitcoin. They launched a future, then they launched the future options and the future-based ETFs, and then they launched a spot ETF, and then every sort of inflow into the spot ETF has been typically associated with price appreciation. And so right now we're kind of following that same path. and we're at the spot ETF step of the equation right now. And I think that's pretty good for Solana, and especially when you have all this negative sentiment around Solana's biggest competitor, which is Ethereum. I think that bodes well for the Solana ecosystem and sort of the momentum behind Solana price appreciation. Now, we talked about the FTX bankruptcy that brought Solana below $10 a coin, and now we're back up at $150. So, there is real investment or real sort of momentum behind Solana price appreciation. So if I look at the options market, I think, I wouldn't underestimate the potential for a crazy upside.
Yeah, so there you go, listeners. If you've been waiting for whatever reason you wanted to play in Solana, but the spot for whatever reason didn't float your boat, now you got some ETFs. They're based off the futures, but so that could lead the way. Look what happened with IBIT eventually coming online and taking the crypto derivatives world by storm. Speaking of taking the crypto world by storm, Greg's beloved XRP clawing its way back. 216 on our last show, 227, up a whopping 11 cents. Greg, I know you can't get enough XRP. You just keep adding to it regardless of this level. What do you make of this historic 11-cent move, sir?
It's funny because I remember I was doing an interview and someone asked me about what I thought at XRP at around $3. And I said, historically, XRP is like a topping signal. When XRP is doing really well, that's usually a local top for crypto. And that happened to be the case once again. So I think this price level is a lot healthier for the ecosystem. I'm kind of half kidding when I say that. It just seems that XRP tends to attract, more of the speculative money in terms of the crypto investor base. And so we've seen this quite a few times, like 2017 and things like that. So right now, I think XRP is not an investment vehicle for me, but it's a one that I like to look at in terms of gauging where we're at in the cycle. And I think right now we're recovering nicely, and I'd be more worried with XRP at $5 than I am where it is today.
The red warning sign of XRP, listeners. We'll run through a few other here on the old altcoin universe, then we'll get to whatever Greg's got lurking and burning a hole in the back of his wallet right now. Everyone's favorite Doge, 16.1 cents on the last show, 17.6 cents this week. Litecoin, 77 and a quarter on our last show, 85 even right now, up a whopping 7 3/4 over the last couple of weeks. Cardano, 64.1 cents, 69.9 cents, so up over a nickel since our last show. Polkadot, 3 3/4 last show, 4.19 right now, up 44 cents over the last couple of weeks. I saw a few of you mentioning your beloved Shiba in the chat there as well. It was a million zeros, 12.18 on our last show. This week, 13.55. Slowly crawling and clawing its way back up, listeners. Not quite the Shiba Lambos, maybe not even the lug nut, but maybe you could afford to buy a little bit of polish for that Shiba Lambo down the road. Greg, before we roll out of here for this week, anything else burning a hole in your wallet from the altcoin universe, sir?
Nope, nothing in the altcoin space that I'm looking at. I'm just, right now, the most interesting narrative is Bitcoin as digital gold to me.
That is an interesting narrative indeed. Do you subscribe to that notion, listeners? Have you pivoted back to digital gold? It seemed like Bitcoin had kind of shucked that off for a while, especially in the big sell-off of a couple of years ago when both gold and Bitcoin kind of didn't really perform as expected. But is that narrative back? Are we done with the high-tech allocation? Does anyone really know what the hell Bitcoin correlates to at the end of the day? Hit us up, let us know. And Greg, if they want to check out all the cool stuff you and the folks over there at Amberdata have cooking, where should they go? What should they do?
Yes, absolutely. So you can sign up for free at pro.amberdata.io. There you'll see all the vol charts, the volatility surface, the flow, all that good stuff. We also write a weekly newsletter that talks about crypto vol and sort of the macro landscape and any sort of trading ideas or things of that nature. You can find that at amberdataderivatives.substack.com.
Check them out, listeners. You literally have no reason not to kick the tires and light the fires over there at Amberdata. That GUI, a lot of that data we're talking about here, all available for free. So if you're even remotely intrigued by these markets and you're listening to a full show about all things crypto derivatives, so I have to wager that you do, then check them out over there, pro.amberdata.io, to begin your journey to the dark side. That's going to do it for us on the network today. Back again with our usual array of content throughout the week, including some cool new stuff that's lurking in the hopper for the not-so-distant future, so keep an eye out for that. And we're back again next Monday, another episode of the Crypto Rundown. Stay safe out there, everybody.
The Crypto Rundown is brought to you by Amberdata. If you're entering the digital asset class, you'll need access to granular on-chain and market data from multiple venues to power research, trading, risk management, and compliance. Amberdata delivers comprehensive data and insights into blockchain networks, crypto markets, and decentralized finance, empowering financial institutions to apply traditional finance methods to digital assets. Amberdata eliminates the infrastructure setup, integration challenges, and maintenance headaches to access digital asset data, reducing cost and time to market to enter the digital asset class. Learn more and download their digital asset data guide at www.amberdata.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.